Thanks for joining us here on 90s Plus. I'm Chris Bianchi. This week marks the start of the Great American Beer Festival, which will run on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. The festival is one of the largest ticketed beer festivals in the entire world, and it's back this year after a 2-year hiatus due to COVID. We chatted with Charlie Papazian, the founder of the Great American Beer Festival, about how it started, what it means, and how it's taken off in the last 40 years. Here's our interview with Charlie.
I'm Charlie. I founded the Great American Beer Festival in 1982. Visions of 40 years later were distant, too distant to think about, and just pulling off this crazy idea was the priority, which was a pretty hairy adventure in 1982 because no one understood what we were doing. In 1981, I went to the UK and went to the Great British Beer Festival for the first time in my life. And I was invited to judge the best of show at the beer festival in Leeds, England. And I walked into this beer festival, and there were tens of thousands of people having a good time at this beer festival that celebrated a national beer culture. And I said, I couldn't help but think, like, well, this is a pretty cool idea. And after a few beers, the juices started working, and I thought, I wonder if we could pull anything like this off in the United States. And, I was with Michael Jackson, the beer guru back in the day. And that evening we were having a beer at a local pub in London, and I suggested to him, well, Michael, do you think we could do a Great American Beer Festival in the United States? And he kind of chuckled a little bit, and he said, well, yeah, Charlie, it's a great idea, but where are you going to get the beer? Because, there were only 40 breweries in the United States then, like this idea of a beer festival to celebrate American beer culture was the last thing on people's minds, because everything was going in a direction of like 3 breweries. People were predicting there would be only 3 breweries left in the United States. And I think, 1982 was a low point, it was about 42. And from that point on, it's here we are, 9,000 plus. The only beer enthusiasts that existed in those days were home brewers. And I was teaching a home brewing class in Boulder, and people from the Denver metropolitan and Boulder area were taking my class over a 10-year period from 1973 to about 1983. And, there were other kinds of beer enthusiasts, but they were far and few between. There were can collectors and beer label collectors and people who got to travel and go to Europe, and they would come back and say, wow, why can't we make beer as good as this here in this country? So there was that sentiment. And things changed. The culture was changing. People's attitudes about beer and food and supporting local initiatives. That idea was just sprouting, and they deregulated the airline business, so people all of a sudden had a little bit more access to fly, and people were tired of the homogenized society of, white bread and Velveeta cheese, kind of, and there was a small core of home brewers that kind of carried the picture, so to speak, and that's the way it was in the 70s, and lo and behold, 1982, the first Great American Beer Festival happened. Somehow it happened, and I have to give the breweries that had faith in this upstart organization called the American Home Brewers Association in Boulder, Colorado. Not many people knew about Boulder, Colorado in those days, and they said yes to donating beer, which was incredible. It's so heartwarming even today to think that there were small regional breweries that still existed in those days, had the faith in this upstart group of home brewers that wanted to put together this beer festival that celebrated American beer culture. And, I got to think that these, the circumstances in the beer business were so dire in those days. I mean, it was the 3-4 big giant breweries dominating 99% of the beer market, and these regional breweries, they must have thought this was a glimmer of hope for the beer business. Maybe something would come out of it, and they participated, and many of them came. The beer festival in those days was largely just a kegger. One brand of beer being celebrated somewhere and given away for practically nothing, probably. We invited the special beers from the regionals. We didn't necessarily go out and get their light lager. We tried to get their porters and stouts and Oktoberfests and cream ales and something different, and it worked really, really well. So the beer festival is kind of a long shot from my original homebrew making classes here in Boulder, Colorado, and it is an unusual beer festival because the whole idea of getting together all these breweries under one roof was really totally strange back, when we first started. It was a new idea, a new way of presenting beer and celebrating beer, really. All we were interested in is having a reason to celebrate what we were doing. That's essentially why we started the Great American Beer Festival. And what better way to celebrate beer than enjoying it amongst people we know and people we got to know through beer. And over the 40 years of the Great American Beer Festival, the behavior of the attendees has been pretty phenomenal, I think. Would you think with all that, some people think with all that beer there's going to be problems, but really, what we hear from law enforcement officers and things, they said they have more problems at sports games and concerts than they do at the Great American Beer Festival, consistently. So, sure, there's people that enjoy the beer too much, but that's a small percentage of what happens. And it's gotten better over the years. The Saturday night used to be a little bit rowdier than Thursday and Friday, but that has mellowed out quite a bit, in my opinion. The spirit of the whole event kind of emotionally intoxicates you into, hey, this is fun and enjoyable, and people are friendly and nice, and you don't have to get loaded up on alcohol to have a good time. I retired from the Brewers Association in January 2019. So I'm no longer involved in the day-to-day organizing of the festival. I'm still looking forward to going. It's I think the staff at the Brewers Association and the directors of the event, they really seem to have managed to keep the beer festival relevant. Like, how many events have been going for 40 straight years? And if you have an event that you want to keep having, you have to reinvent yourself every once in a while. You have to realize that society changes, cultures, attitudes change, and you just got to make the whole event relevant to the people who are there, and the kind of people who were there in 1982 through 1985. Everything was new, so that was very different. And now we're in 2022, and everybody in there has experienced great beer and has visited breweries and enjoys the eccentric as well as the traditional. So there are reasons that in creating an environment that gives people a reason to come, and we talked about several of them, and supporting the whole idea of camaraderie and being able to talk with each other. I mean, you don't go in there and you don't get blasted with an orchestrated music or anything, because you want to have to a certain extent, you want to have a conversation with people. And the whole idea of food and beer, that culture has evolved as well. And there's an opportunity to do that. And there's opportunity to hear people speak about their experiences. And that's what the beer festival is today. And the 50th anniversary will be something else. And it'll be just as much fun. Seeing all of these regional, local, state beer festivals arise over the years has been very, very rewarding and reassuring. You know, if we were doing it for the money, I mean, I'm sure if it was a corporation doing the beer festival, they may feel threatened that these other beer festivals were popping out all over the country. But we actually encouraged them and gave seminars and presentations and stories and articles and interviews on how to do these kinds of festivals, because we wanted to raise the water, so to speak, the ocean of beer to a level where it was accessible to everyone here in this country. And you know, the focus with the Great American Beer Festival, sure, we had ideas. Well, can we have a traveling Great American Beer Festival? Should we have another one in another part of the country? We tried that one year, and it didn't go so well. That was Baltimore, I forget the year, but it didn't go so well for a number of reasons. And, you know, after that, we just looked at ourselves and said, you know, really, this is the Great American Beer Festival. Let's put all our energy into making it the greatest of the Great American Beer Festival every year, and not try to be the one and only beer festival that people would ever want to go to. We encourage people to go to all kinds of beer festivals, because it was the mission, and still is the mission of the Brewers Association, I'm sure. It's to elevate the spirit of enjoying beer responsibly and celebrating the culture that we have. And one event can't do it all.